found a boy in my pool after a storm. I wish I never brought him inside my house. I found him after a storm. As a kid, I loved searching our pool for creatures the sea had swept in. Grammy's house was built on the very edge of the shore, a giant ancient beach house where I spent every summer. But in Florida, storm season never really ends. I grew used to waking up every morning and running outside barefoot where the sea was still lapping at my ankles. I spent all day sifting through our debris-littered pool with my dollar store fishnet, searching for sea creatures. There was one time when I thought I found something. I was kneeling on the edge, peering into the glassy surface speckled with dirt and leaves. Movement under the stillness sent me stumbling back, dropping my net. Upon closer inspection, though, it was just an old plank of wood. I was awkwardly poking at it when the surface exploded, drenching me. For a split second, I felt a rush of excitement. Fish. Until the fish started laughing. Roman, the boy from across the street, the one who could hold his breath far longer than normal humans, was infamous for lurking in Grammy's pool. He claimed he was doing research, but I never knew what for. Roman was a weird kid. He reminded me of a fish. His eyes were too big, too far apart, and I swore his nose grew an inch every day. Sopping wet, he hauled himself out of the pool and slumped down beside me, dark blonde hair plastered over his eyes. Roman prodded me. He was always prodding me to get my attention, and it drove me insane. "Whatcha looking for?" "Fish," I answered. He laughed, kicking his feet in the water. "Me too. Do you want me to help you find some?" I told him to go away, back to his own house. But Roman was allergic to the word no. He turned to me, blowing soaking strands of curls out of his eyes. "Okay, so can I watch you?" Roman nudged me, and I almost lost my balance. "I know what you're looking for. You know, I'm not stupid." I had a feeling he had been eavesdropping over our broken fence. Before I could call my parents, he slipped back into the water. Roman wasn't a boy to trust. I accidentally told him I peed in the sea once, and by the next day, the entire class was calling me names. So, I would have much preferred to search for marine life without him lurking around. I found all kinds of things in our pool. Starfish, the occasional jellyfish spilled over in the tide, and even a baby shark my mom had to rescue with a fishing net. But I never found what I was looking for, what my Grammy had searched for and ultimately given up on, and what Roman was catching on to. Fish people, stay with me. Okay, so you should know my Grammy wasn't fully there after being diagnosed with an aggressive form of Alzheimer's. But she was also a very intelligent woman. For the most part, she was bedridden by the time I started elementary school. But the stories she used to tell me when she was awake kept me visiting, even when I knew deep down that I didn't want to watch her deteriorate. Her stories of encounters with fish people were worth it, worth the pain of staying by her side. I remember my 10th birthday. The power went out right in the middle of my favorite episode of Hannah Montana. Grammy was sleeping on the couch, tucked under blankets, and I was inhaling my ice cream birthday cake. When the storm blew out the TV, I abandoned my snack, remembering Mom's instructions in case a hurricane hit. I grabbed my flashlight, 2 bottles of water, snacks, and her meds, and helped Grammy down into the basement to wait it out. I was used to her staying silent, just sitting with her arms wrapped around her knees, her expression content. She was starting to forget my name. Some days I was Charlotte, then I was Charlie, and then I was a stranger. This wasn't one of those times. Grammy smiled at me, patted the space next to her, and said, "Can I tell you about the fish people, Charlotte?" Grammy didn't usually talk to me. It wasn't that she didn't want to, it was more that she couldn't. Mom explained it the best way she could, in a to-the-point mom way. Blunt and realistic. I would have to come to terms with Grammy forgetting me. I didn't understand Alzheimer's, but I did understand the concept of forgetting. I started to notice it during visits. At first, it was subtle. Grammy would forget to eat her dinner or go to the bathroom. But then she started asking if I was a friend of her granddaughter. And painfully, so fucking painfully, she started asking who I was. I saw my Grammy deteriorate and I was helpless. Mom and Dad tried to put her into a home, but she insisted on staying by the sea. That's all she said. "I want to stay by the sea," she whispered, barely a breath, stuck in her favorite chair, her eyes growing more vacant, more frenzied and scared. What I didn't understand as a child was that this disease was cruel. It wasn't going to leave anything behind. It made her scream and cry, and in the later stages, try and throw her hands at my mother, who she no longer recognized. "I want to die in the water. I want to die in the water. Let me die in the water." I think her words broke my parents' hearts. I knew I shouldn't have, but I kept visiting, even when it hurt, even when the inevitable arrived, when she spoke less and less until she was barely speaking at all. I had gotten used to her calling me different names, random ones that came to mind. I got used to her snapping at me, then apologizing, then asking where her granddaughter was. I got used to imagining our conversations instead. The two of us would sit for hours, me lost in fantasy while she stared blankly at me. I would try not to cry, pretending to manifest conversations that weren't one-sided. She would ask about school, and I would say, "Oh yeah, it's fun." I would imagine her laugh, her voice saying, "I hope you're making lots of friends." "Yeah, Grammy, I am." I guess I got used to this blank side of her, like a ghost wearing my Grammy's face. When she spoke, I don't think I fully registered it. I watched the ceiling seem to sway as the emergency lights flickered on and off, shadows casting through the shutters reflecting across her face. The dull sound of howling wind and the rattling of the house's old foundations sent me into a panic. Grammy's house wasn't built for hurricanes, and I was terrified. The house groaned like a deep-sea monster, and I felt helpless in the pit of its stomach. But this was the first time she had looked me directly in the eye and called me Charlotte. I was scared that this was the last conversation I would be having with her. "Fish people," I repeated, resisting the urge to bury my head in my knees. Across the room, wine bottles rattled on old wooden shelves. When one rolled onto the concrete floor and shattered on impact, something ice-cold slithered down my spine. Grammy nodded with a dreamlike smile. "I met him when I was your age," she said, reminiscing. "A beautiful boy from the sea, and I was going to marry him." She laughed, and it was a good laugh. It was Grammy's laugh. "He asked me to be his queen, and we were going to run away together to his home under the ocean." Her voice grew somber, her unfocused eyes finding me. The lights flickered off, but I wasn't scared. Even when my Grammy became a faceless shadow, I was captivated by her story. When a magical boy promises to take you to a whole other world and promises marriage, what else is there to say except yes? I found myself smiling, comforted by her words, her effortless way of storytelling. I jumped up to grab my flashlight, holding it underneath my chin. Grammy continued. "His name was Sebastian," she murmured. "Such a beautiful man. His hair reminded me of seaweed, tangled and curling perfectly over eyes the color of stardust." I was fully invested in the story. "Did he have a tail?" She grinned, and her expression was so warm, so I felt my eyes sting. "He did," she whispered, giddy. Grammy curled her lip. "I wanted to tell my friends, but he was very clear." She mimicked his voice, holding up her finger. "Clementine, you must promise me you will never reveal my secret to anyone." She found my gaze, her smile softening. "I kept that promise. We made arrangements to run away together. He told me to meet him in the shallows at dawn underneath the sunrise, and I waited." Her tone, that had been so chipper, so happy, like she was reliving the memory, grew darker. "I waited for him, sitting on the sand, my toes in the shallows, until sunrise turned to sunset." Her expression crumpled like she was going to cry. "I waited. I never stopped waiting. Every day, I would step into the shallows and wait for him to come back. Even when I was unrecognizable to him, when I had aged way beyond what he knew." Grammy's smile was soft. "I want to die under the sea," she whispered, grasping for my hands. "So I can find him, because I belong to the ocean, Charlotte." Her fingernails bit into my skin, wrinkled eyes already losing clarity, her grip tightening. "Can you help me find him?" As a 10-year-old, I was convinced I could find Sebastian for her. I stood in the shallows every morning for hours, shivering, calling out for him. I stupidly thought that if I told the sea my Grammy was sick, he would hear and come back. When I was starting middle school, Roman came over to ask my dad for spare fishing gear. Grammy's face lit up, her eyes widening. Sitting in her chair, she nearly toppled off. After not speaking for days or weeks, she was laughing. She thought he was Sebastian, pointing at him with frenzied eyes and laughing, saying, "You haven't changed, Sebastian. You're here." Roman left pretty quickly, shooting me a look before leaving. It became increasingly obvious I wasn't going to find Sebastian. I had this fantasy of taking my Grammy in her wheelchair all the way to the shore. The two of them would talk, and maybe he really could take her back to his world. But that was fiction. The reality was that I was losing my grandma to a disease with zero mercy, and instead of coming to terms with it, I hid in fantasy. Eventually, Mom told me, as gently as possible, that Grammy had deteriorated. As her disease progressed and reached the later stages, she insisted she could breathe underwater. That's what killed her. One day, Grammy waded into the ocean during a trip to the beach and never resurfaced. Mom and Dad were upset, but I was relieved. Grammy never wanted to die on land, so she had gotten what she wanted. Maybe I was still holding on to the possibility that Sebastian kept his promise. She left me the house, as well as letters to Sebastian she never threw into the ocean. So, during college, I spent every weekend there, dropping a letter a day into the surf. However, the house wasn't just mine. I was in class when I got a text from my favorite person. "I'm not cleaning the pool." In her will, to my confusion, my grandma had named Roman, yes, the weird fish-looking kid, as a co-owner of the house once we both turned 18. I thought it was a mistake, and so did my parents, but no, my grandma was very clear, naming him specifically because he just happened to resemble Sebastian. Dad was pissed, and he had every right to be. Roman wasn't even an acquaintance. I finally built up the courage to tell him I was looking for my Grammy's long-lost merman boyfriend, and, of course, he went and blabbed to the whole school. Thanks to him, kids were calling me Flounder right up to 8th grade. Roman, surprisingly, had a growth spurt, lost a ton of baby fat, and no longer looked like a fish. So, lucky him, I guess. This guy teased me all the way to graduation about my Grammy's merman boyfriend. It's not like I didn't notice him at 16, standing alone in the shallows in the early hours of the morning, his gaze fixed on the surf as if searching for something. I caught him once, ankle deep, arms folded under a sunrise, a pack of fish sticks in his pocket, and at his feet, a lone fish stick dancing in the tide. He didn't say it directly, but I was pretty sure Roman was looking for Sebastian too. But then we both grew up. Roman's text was the icing on the cake of an already shitty day. It was his turn to clean the pool, as per our contract we made when we were 18, and relatively civil and on talking terms. Ever since starting college, he had become insufferable. Apparently, gaining a personality and love for literature and creative writing turns you into a sociopath. Roman missed my Grammy's anniversary 2 years in a row, lied to my parents about being sick both times, and used her house to throw parties. I cleaned the pool a month earlier, but apparently, this guy had the memory of a goldfish. I texted back, "It's your turn." I wasn't expecting him to reply so fast. "I'm going to a party," was all he texted back, followed by a slew of crying emojis. "It's literally a pool, it's not hard LMAO. He followed up with, "She's your grandma, Charlotte." Roman was right. She was my Grammy, so I had to take responsibility. On the night I arrived back at the house, a storm hit. It wasn't a bad one, but I did hide in the newly renovated basement just in case. I missed the old, ancient vibe. Yes, the rattling shelves filled with bottles were a death trap waiting to happen. But I enjoyed picking up all of Grammy's ceramic fish ornaments and the shells lining each wall. She told me the shells were gifts from Sebastian. Grammy left them to my mother, who gave them to a thrift store. Now, the basement was more of a wine cellar acting as a storage room. I was falling asleep on an old pile of boxes. But then I remembered I left the gate open. When my phone vibrated with a text that just said, "Shut the gate, idiot," I grabbed my flashlight and coat. When I got outside, the wind was already picking up. Kicking through storm debris, I skirted the pool's edge toward the gate. I stopped, almost skidding on a fallen deck chair, when I caught movement in the pool. Twinkling light spiderwebbing under the rippling surface. The pool lights weren't on. I dropped to my knees at the edge, scanning the water. Immediately, I was a little kid again, scrambling for my old dollar store fishing net. I leaned closer, illuminating stray driftwood and an inflatable beach ball. Here, fishy, fishy. The pretty iridescent glow under the water was not my flashlight. I clicked it off, balancing myself on the edge, following the greenish light prickling under the surface. I had a sudden spontaneous idea to slip off my shoes and wade into the water. When I retracted back on my heels, I caught movement again, a shadow lurking just underneath the blue. Before it broke through, two eyes staring directly at me. Roman. I blinked, and then I shuffled back on my hands and knees, knocking my flashlight into the water. It wasn't Roman. It was a guy, my age, early 20s. I detected annoyance in his expression, amusement flickering on his lips. Thick brown curls stuck to his forehead tangled with seaweed, a crown of driftwood and sea glass. Slowly, my gaze dropped into the pool, finding his torso, which ended just below his waist. The boy came closer, head inclining. When the water moved, lapping around him, I glimpsed his legs fused together behind him, slimy scales bleeding into something more akin to a tail. When he grasped the pool walls, his eyes finding mine, I realized he was in pain. I saw the thick trail of red diluting the surface, blood splatters painting the pool walls. He was hurt. I held my finger up to signal him to wait, and waded into the pool to grab my flashlight. I was already off balance, waist deep in the shallow end, when a violent gust of wind sent me toppling and head first. I felt his hands coming around me and dragging me to the surface. I plucked my flashlight and clicked it on, illuminating the pool, a trail of blood-smearing blue tiles. When I tried to help him, he was surprisingly less timid than I had expected. He showed me his tail, tangled in my dad's old fishing net. His body was slimy to the touch, a full fishtail. He was human, with skin all the way up to his torso, where a greenish slime took over, bleeding into scales that sculpted the rest of him. When I checked his injury, a large gash was taken out of his left fin. His blood looked just like mine. I told him to roll onto his side, and he looked confused before doing so. I ran my fingers over bluish carvings just below his ribs, my hands trembling. Gills. This guy was the real deal, which meant my grandma was telling the truth. When I was finished checking him over, I had an idea. Grammy had an old-fashioned bathtub in the downstairs bathroom. If I could get him out of the storm and inside, I could treat him. I asked him if I could pull him out. The boy looked surprised, but nodded. He didn't speak, only stabbing at his throat with his index finger before holding out his hand, entangling his fingers with mine. His eyes were frightened, but determined. I dragged him out of the pool before grabbing a bucket, filling it up and soaking him. I was conscious of Grammy's words when speaking about Sebastian in his fish form. Children of the sea must be soaked through at all times. If not, they will suffocate. I had asked her how long Sebastian could maintain human legs, and her eyes darkened. Legs are a last resort. The boy was already breathless, his eyes flickering, unfocused gaze on the sky. I soaked him, grabbed his hands, and promised him I was going to save him. The last thing I wanted was for this merman to suffocate on land. So I grabbed his arms, made sure to soak him every few minutes, and dragged him inside the house and into the downstairs bathroom. It took all of my upper body strength and almost sent me falling on my ass, but I managed to haul him into the tub and fill it up. His injuries weren't too bad now I had the luxury of light. I knelt on the edge of the tub, watching damaged scales healing, reforming themselves over skin. The way they moved, his skin turning blue, then green, hardening into scales, reminded me of a virus, a slow, spreading sheen of slime creeping over his flesh. His tail was the most surprising. I expected it to be a fully formed fin, but when I looked closer, I swore I could see traces of bones jutting underneath, almost resembling legs. I tended to him all night, checking and rechecking the temperature of the tub. When I noticed him shivering, I added some warm water, and he seemed content, leaning over the edge, his chin resting on his arms. "So, you're Sebastian?" I asked him when I'd bandaged up his fin. The boy shook his head, raising a brow, like he was offended. I asked him his name, but he didn't respond, more interested in my shampoo bottles. He poked one, and it dropped into the bath. The boy shot me a frightened look, and I picked one up. "It's shampoo," I said, prodding my ponytail. "It's for your hair." He nodded slowly, but I noticed him inching away from them. I talked to him for a while, enjoying his presence. I kept him company, telling him about my Grammy stories and Sebastian. He was a little too big for the tub, his tail flopping over the side, but he seemed comfortable, resting his arms on the side, squinting his eyes and nodding at the wrong times. I thought it was adorable, the way he at least pretended to understand me. When he zoned out, dipping his head under the water and blowing bubbles, I figured he was hinting at me to shut up. Halfway through an anecdote, though, I started to get breathless. I thought I was just tired. I had been up all night, and I could see the first glimmers of sunrise outside the window. But suddenly, my chest felt tight. All the breath sucked from my lungs. I thought I was getting sick, maybe the flu, before my legs gave way and I dropped onto the floor, like being severed from strings. I remember trying to move, trying to breathe, but I couldn't. My mouth opening, lips parting, gasping. Couldn't breathe. I couldn't fucking breathe. It's like there was no oxygen in the room. My lungs were starving. Breathing was suddenly so fucking hard. I sucked in as much air as I could, but my body rejected it, contorting as I rolled onto my stomach. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, blood running thick down my chin. I could feel something alive, something wriggling, writhing down my throat. When my lungs contracted, my mouth filled with the taste of salt. I flopped onto my back, my vision blurring in and out, blood-tinged water spluttering from my lips and pooling around me. A slow, spreading puddle gave me life when I rolled into it, forcing my numb body back to flickering consciousness. Fucking finally! His voice was like ocean waves echoing in my skull. I rolled onto my side, and I remember feeling like the water was air, the water was giving me oxygen. There was a loud splash and then wet slapping footsteps moving towards me. Through spotty vision, I saw his tail splitting apart into slimy masses, undulating scales writhing over bones bleeding into legs, a horrific, deformed mimic of a human body. I felt ice-cold slimy hands leeching around my ankles. "I thought you were never going to stop talking," he laughed. "Your grandmother said you were a talker." But wow, I caught his sparkling grin. She was right, though. Dad says I can't be king without a queen. The merman's nails bit into me. His words felt like needles being stuck into me. "And your grandmother said you would be the perfect bride, Charlotte." I watched his feet stumble, tripping over himself as he dragged me toward the door. He had human feet. The only thing not human was the green fleshy substance growing on his soles. I felt his arms around me, lifting me into the air and dropping me into the pool. I plunged down, expecting my lungs to relax now that I was in water, my skin and throat and lungs craving it. Instead, though, my body had a very human reaction, immediately clawing for air. I broke the surface, choking up clumps of blood, and found myself face to face with the merman sitting on the side of the pool. The boy's lip curled as he watched my legs struggle to stay afloat. 15 minutes, Charlotte," he murmured, casually crossing one scaled leg over the other. He surveyed me with a mix of confusion and amusement, cocking his head. "That's how long it takes for a human to lose their legs." He leaned forward, kicking his feet in the water. "So, I'm not sure I understand what's going on right now." I found my voice choked at the back of my throat. "You can talk," I managed to hiss out. He shrugged, rolling his eyes. "Well, yeah, I have a mouth, so yes, I can talk." I asked him if he knew my grandma, and his expression brightened. "I do." His smile was smug. "She told me you would make a wonderful bride." The merman's words stung. Grammy would never say that. "So, she found him?" I pushed. "Did my grandmother find Sebastian?" Before he could answer, however, A shadow loomed behind him. The shadow mouthed, "What the fuck?" Roman, wide-eyed and clutching a bottle of vodka. He stood in shorts and a tee, a pair of Ray-Bans pinning back thick, sandy hair. He looked like he'd just stumbled out of a spring break party. But he wasn't drunk. Or maybe he was, but sober enough to recognize that I was in trouble. I think he meant to attack the merman, but the boy was too fast, spinning around and clawing at his face. Luckily, Roman had the upper hand, with the merman already balancing on the edge, not yet used to human feet. Thank God he had common sense, shoving the fish boy into the pool. The boy hit the water with a loud splash, and Roman staggered back. When the merman dove under, his tail slapping the sides of the pool, my friend dropped to his knees on the edge, holding out his hand for me to grab. I grasped for his wrist, my body already protesting leaving water. "Tell me I'm still tripping," Roman whispered, when he pulled me toward him. I could only shake my head, choking on stinging air that was lashing my lungs. "Well, what the fuck is going on? What is that?" he hissed, hauling me out of the pool. I collapsed face down, gasping for breath, rolling onto my back. For a moment, I was disoriented. My body caught between the water and the air, unsure which it needed more. My lungs contracted, already craving the depths. But once I had spluttered up half a gallon of blood-stained water, my body flopped back down. Finally, I could breathe again. Instead of speaking, I shuffled back on my hands and knees and gestured for Roman to grab a bucket. I pointed to the pool, and then to myself, my voice still stuck in my throat, tangled on my tongue. Roman filled the bucket, and then dumped the contents over my head. I found my breath, thankfully, and then my voice. "Do I have gills?" I whispered, running my fingers down my torso. "Do you have what?" "Gills," I said through my teeth. "Check my back." I shivered when he dragged his nails down my back. No? You don't have gills, dude." I checked myself over, almost obsessively searching for that greenish slime creeping over my skin. But I was clear. "It's a fish person," I answered Roman's earlier question. His eyes widened, the bucket slipping from his fingers. "Sebastian." I noticed the merman had drawn blood across his cheek, 3 deep gashes. "I'm fine," he said when I started forward. Roman prodded the scratch gingerly, his gaze on the pool. "Where did he go?" I followed his eyes, catching movement underneath. He was hiding. Roman studied the water, his tongue in his cheek. "So, your grandma's homicidal merman friend Sebastian came to, what? Murder you?" I didn't respond, slowly getting to my knees and dragging my fingers across the surface. "You know my grandmother?" I spoke to the water, ignoring Roman's warnings to stay away from the edge. "But my grandma died when I was in middle school. She walked into the sea and never came back." The water rippled, but the merman didn't break through. "There's no way you know my grandma," I gritted out. "So what the fuck are you?" It hit me then that Grammy really did drown. This thing was fucking with my head. The merman only shot me a knowing smile. Roman disappeared for a moment, reappearing with a bottle of water. He downed the whole thing, scrunching it up and throwing it in the pool. "Hey, asshole," he said. "Answer her questions." I spent the next few minutes questioning an empty pool. The merman had taken a vow of silence. I didn't notice at first. I was too busy waiting for the merman to make his next move. But Roman, sitting cross-legged next to me, had gone through 3 bottles of water in under 5 minutes. It was only when I noticed the slight tinge of green crawling over his left cheek, when I realized something was very wrong. Roman was halfway through his 4th bottle of water when I whacked it out his hand. He looked at me in confusion, slowly tilting his head, before dropping onto his stomach and slurping up the spilled water, letting out heavy pants, like he couldn't breathe. "Roman," I tried to pull him to his feet, but he didn't respond, rolling around in the stemming puddle. I jumped up, grabbed his ankles, and dragged him away from the pool. "Fuck," Roman finally spluttered, coughing something up. I can't breathe." His short, panting gasps turned into heaves for breath. Rolling him onto his side in the recovery position, I waited for him to start puking up water, but he didn't. His cheeks were sickly pale, almost gaunt, like something was sucking the life out of him. When I grabbed Roman's leg, I saw it, like a virus, rippling over his bare flesh. In a panic, I plucked off a slimy scale, but another grew in its place, then another, his skin hardening into a marble-like substance, bleeding into fish-like scales. He's going to suffocate, you know. A voice startled me. The merman was leaning over the edge of the pool, chin resting on his fist. Right now, his body is changing, and if you don't let it, his lungs will reject the change, shrivel up, and the host will die. I was paralyzed before it hit me. When Roman's eyes flickered, his body jerked, his legs fusing together, bones undulating. I realized I had no choice but to push him into the water. I think I apologized or tried to, my heart in my throat. I tried to roll him into the pool, but the merman hissed. "No, he needs the sea," the boy said sternly. "If you want him to breathe long enough to get him into the sea, you need to slice into his lower back and his neck." Roman was conscious enough to protest, squeezing out a, "No, are you fucking serious? Don't touch me." His voice dropped into a snarl, eyes rolling back. But I had no choice. I grabbed a knife from my kitchen. With trembling hands, I sliced straight through Roman's throat, and to my relief, he let out a strangled gasp for breath. His eyes flew open. He was breathing, digging deeper. Blood splattered my face, ice cold and wrong. But something else hit me, and my body immediately entered fight or flight. I screamed, dropping the knife and shuffling back, grasping my face to make sure they weren't on me. Took me a moment to realize what I was staring at. Wriggling between flaps of flesh were tiny, worm-like things, filling him, gushing out of the cut. When they made contact with air, they started to shrivel up and dry, going still. Dancing tendrils crumbled apart, spiderwebbing down Roman's neck. I wasn't talking to a merman. Sebastian was never a merman. A magical being who lived under the ocean. My Grammy and I had been talking to parasites that had taken over human bodies. They forced the body to adapt to water, to crave water, and then drown them. The merman didn't want a queen to marry. I felt sick, my stomach contorting. "You only drown men," I said, the words tumbling from my mouth. When the merman inclined its head, I knew exactly what it was thinking. "You can't tell the difference between us," I said. "So you wait to see if we will change." "You've got to be fucking kidding me." Roman was coughing, spluttering, his eyes wide. But even conscious, he was crawling toward the pool, toward water, dragging himself, like the thing inside him was in full control. I grabbed him before he could, scooping him into my arms. He was so light, his legs already half transformed, glued together into a tail. "He needs to drown in the sea," the merman said. "He needs water or he'll die." The boy's smile was filled with thread-like worms. "The body doesn't have long." As if emphasizing his words, Roman's body was jerking in my arms, trying to get back to water. His eyes weren't his, quivering lips screaming at me to throw him in. With zero choice, I pulled the merman out of the pool with one hand. With Roman dying in my arms, I carried him all the way to the shallows and let him slip into the water. The merman instructed me to fully slash open his throat, so his body could adapt. When I couldn't, the merman did it for me, slashing open his throat, carving gills into marble-like flesh. Roman flopped into blood-stained water, gasping, sobbing, rolling onto his front. He begged me not to let him go, but already, his voice was different, dropping down in octaves, his eyes unblinking, staring at me. I told Roman it was okay, and that he was just going to sleep. By the time he lay on his stomach, a tail pushing out through his mangled legs, he blinked at me like I was a stranger. The merciful thing would have been to kill him, to stop the parasites writhing beneath his skin, already coiling around his iris. But I couldn't. I was paralyzed, watching my friend suffocate on land. I watched the merman drag him out into the ocean, the two of them disappearing under the surf. I wanted to believe that the parasite didn't take all of them. The merman seemed to retain human speech. Maybe Roman would be the same. I went home and took 3 showers, scrubbing my body until I was screaming. I cleaned up the blood in the pool, splattered on the tiles. And then I fucking cried. Roman's disappearance was ruled a drowning. A year later, it's spring break, and my parents have been trying to convince me to rent out the house to college kids. I've been refusing. I don't want anyone near the pool. I clean it every weekend, but I can't bring myself to actually use it. I've been researching what exactly I encountered. The closest I've come to is the horsehair worm, a parasitic thing that manipulates the host's behavior to drown themselves. But this thing only infects insects. It's harmless to humans. So what infected Roman and the merman? Is this an evolved version? The symptoms are exactly the same. Horsehair parasites, all parasites, lay eggs to reproduce. So why was this one so obsessed with finding a female? 3 days ago, my parents managed to convince me to rent it out for the summer. I came down to check it in the morning, half asleep. Mom and Dad are visiting to see if it needs any renovations. I was planning to let a group of middle schoolers splash around in it for a girl's birthday. Stepping out into the yard, the first thing I noticed was the cement patio was soaking. And there he was, casually leaning against the pool edge, chin resting on his arms. His tail lapped the water, fully formed, a greenish blue. I don't know why my Grammy described the tails as magical and breathtaking. She didn't see the reality of Sebastian. There was nothing magical about the parasite clinging to my friend's body. A cruel mimic of what this thing thought a tail was. Human bones contorted and forcibly molded and shaped to adapt. There was nothing beautiful about his unblinking, colorless eyes staring at me. Nothing enchanting about the crown of sea glass forced onto his head. Beads of velvety red staining his temples, or the strands of seaweed tangled in his hair. I saw him for what he really was, a drowned husk of flesh infested with a parasite. There was no recognition in his expression, and yet he was still here, in the pool he had been playing in as a child. I wanted to believe it was his memories bringing him back to a familiar place. But then I saw the wriggling, thread-like things lapping around him. With a grin, Roman slipped under the surface, his tail splashing water in my face. I called my parents with shaking hands, canceling the visit. I messaged the kids not to bother. But already, the gate was flying open, excited footsteps slapping across the patio. The first kid cannonballed, followed by another and another. They kept coming like they were drawn to my pool. Townspeople, throwing themselves into the depths. Except they didn't resurface. I ran back inside and locked myself in my room. I'm terrified this thing is spreading. It's been an hour since I locked myself in here. It's so quiet. I'm too scared to look outside. I can't stop thinking about the merman's words. 15 minutes. That's how long it takes for a human to lose their legs.